Hi, my name is Scott Simmons. I am the pastor at Faith United Church of Christ, which is on the south side of Indianapolis. And I am here with Jen Vance, one of our church members, a leader in our church. Jen has led our toy drive, been involved in our food pantry, our COVID team, other things, I'm sure, kids ministry.
Kids ministry.
Yeah, we love you, Jen. And Jen, you are a 1 on the Enneagram, as you report. What does that mean to you, and what have you learned by learning about the Enneagram1?
So I have to say that finding out I was an Enneagram1 was not a surprise to me at all. It meshes up perfectly with my DISC profile, with my Myers-Briggs assessments, with every other survey inventory of personality I've ever taken.
Why have you taken so many personality tests?
So when you do business development and sales for work, a lot of times they have you take those tests to understand your personal sales technique or profile.
Mm-hmm.
So during my time working in sales, I took both the Myers-Briggs and the DISC profile. And then recently, as part of a leadership coaching course, I've taken the Hogan leadership quality and leadership value assessments. Okay.
All right. I always just think of you as the scientist. I forget that you actually are so much more. Yeah, because I'm just like a PhD in chemistry. Wow, that's like impressive enough. So, okay, so you were not surprised that you're a 1. What are some of the characteristics of a 1 that really fit who you are?
Yeah, so 1s tend to be perfectionists. They tend to drive themselves very hard. They tend to pursue a lot of things. And those are all characteristics that I have had my entire life. The key motivator and root sin for a 1 is anger. And although I don't tend to feel and express a lot of anger in the form of rage towards other people, I do have a lot of sense of indignation. I very much value justice and equality and fairness. And that moral indignation is really kind of the driving fire, and tends to be a driving fire in a lot of 1s. The need to make the world more perfect, or make life more perfect, or make your children more perfect, or whatever it is that you morally or internally feel is wrong, you have that fire to need to change it.
Yeah, and do you score high as an 8? Do you know?
I don't think I was very high as it. I scored pretty high globally.
Yeah. Okay.
I was a 1 wing 2.
1 wing 2. Okay. The reason I asked that question is that the 8s tend to pursue justice, or they can if the healthier they get. But I think that the motivating factor, while 8s also kind of are in that triad that have guilt and anger as a motivator, 8s, they have a need for power. And so they actually have this heart for the powerless. Whereas a 1, you have an ideal of the good.
Right.
Right. And it's about creating that good ideal rather than this other 8 thing.
Yep.
Right. But both driven by a sense of like, you know,
injustice and
wrong. Something's wrong here. Yeah. Can you think of a time early in your life where you were really propelled forward by a sense of something being wrong and that put you into action?
Yeah, I think in my childhood, I grew up in a military family. I was the oldest of 3 girls. My father was gone on training or overseas in the service a lot during my childhood. So it was my mom. and 3 girls. And
Wow.
so I feel like for me, there was a lot of internal drive to try to help keep the chaos down for my mom in my childhood. And so I strive to be as perfect as I could to make life easier for her. I tried to make my siblings as perfect as I perceived they could and should be to make life easier for my mom. So I feel like I tried to strive towards that perfection to right the wrong of my mom having to take on all of the life as I knew it herself.
Yeah. So she's kind of solo parenting and overwhelmed. Right. And you're looking at her.
And also dealing with the emotional baggage of the fact that her husband is on the other side of the country in a conflict zone.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. When I read about the childhoods of ones, or the typical childhoods, the first one that stood out is that there was a parent that held you to this high standard and didn't give much praise. But then the secondary sounds more like yours, where there's just like chaos at foot. And so somebody was just you as the child were trying to be good because there was so much challenge, and you didn't want to add to it. You wanted to take it away. And so like, you got to be perfect because, there's not much margin, Yeah. Huh.
In fact, my parents have frequently asked me, whoever told you had to be perfect? So, it's certainly not their pressure.
Yeah. That's a huge theme that's come out in our post worship discussions. I think you've been a part of a few of those, but we've been using a discussion guide from a book about how to have empathy for each type. And it always starts off with this kind of childhood trauma. And a few participants have said, wait a second, does it always have to be this like negative thing? And right, like what I've learned as a parent is like, even if I do my darndest, like there's going to be some sort of dynamic that my child's personality type is going to develop in response to.
Yeah.
Right.
And you can't control it. I mean, one of the things I read is that most ones basically come into the world with this view, this unbridled joy, and view the world as perfect until something happens that makes them realize it's not. And the personality forms around trying to make it more perfect. Trying to restore what they thought it was.
Yeah, I've read about that too. And in fact, oftentimes what a one needs when they become overly serious is to recapture some of the like joyfulness of the 7 that was happy-go-lucky, right? So for you to go and play is serious business because you need to be less serious. Where a 1, a 7, sometimes the opposite. They need to get more principled. Yeah, I think that's a really, compelling sort of thought too, because I think Richard Rohr says that ones reflect the goodness of God. And so your ideal of the perfect, of the good, that's the spirit of God in you. And it's appropriate when that gets ruined, like when we're kicked out of the garden, so to speak, right. That there is some sort of, what do we do about that? And you want to restore it, reform it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Personally. That's the big things about a 1 is ones feel a very heavy personal weight to be responsible for restoring that justice or restoring that ideal or making things perfect. So there's a lot of sense of the whole world riding on a 1's shoulders. I wear this bracelet that says, I am enough. Reminder to myself that whatever it is I can do is enough. God didn't put me here to fix everything. And I remind myself that I and what I can do is enough.
Yeah. Yeah, there's you are part of God's plan for restoration, but you're not the plan. You know?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I'm working with the Apostle Paul for my sermon on Sunday as a one. And when you talked about just the weight on your shoulders, right before this interview, I was going through the Acts text, the early part, and Paul, this is before he had his conversion. And so he is like single-handedly trying to stamp out the Christian church, right?
Because he has perceived that it is a wrong in the world. It's his perfect ideal is in the Jewish faith, and this Christian thing has just shown up and messed it all up. So
that's
he
right.
really feels responsible to get rid of it.
You're right. And you know what's kind of interesting, and I wanted to try this out with you, and this could be a little touchy, so warning.
Okay.
In chapter 7, where Paul's introduced at the stoning of Stephen, there's just this kind of one line that says he was holding the coats of the people stoning, something like that, and that he approved of the stoning of Stephen, the Christian leader. At the end of Stephen's long speech, where he recounts the entire chapter, basically the story of ancient Israel, he makes a claim that the leaders, who many of them I think are one-type personalities, they think they know what is good and they're in charge of it, that they have they've known the law, but they've rebelled against it. And there's something else he says after that, but that seems to be this catalytic moment where it's like he points out their hypocrisy or offers a critique of them, and they are hypersensitive and like can't handle it, right? Because they care so much.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
and they're very convicted of what they believe as well. So, and that tends to be the unhealthy version of a one. Healthy version of one becomes very dogmatic, very hypercritical of others, very hypocritical in terms of not practicing what they claim they believe. Yeah.
And so like a critique, and all of us struggle, I think, with receiving criticism, but a critique towards a one about something they care about can just be devastating.
Absolutely.
But not as devastating, I have heard, is your own critique of yourself.
That is generally the case, yes. In fact, a lot of ones hold themselves, they hold others to a high standard, but they generally hold themselves to a far higher standard. And find out that they're falling short of that standard can be very devastating. So to kind of turn to the root sin of a one, the root sin is anger. And it can take a lot of forms. And I think for a one who is unhealthy, who is in that hypocritical state and has that critique, often that anger turns inward instead of outward. So ones are prone to have high levels of anxiety and prone to have high levels of depression, which is likely a turning of that anger upon themselves and dragging themselves down.
I've thought about just how anger and guilt are kind of two sides of the same coin, in the sense that anger is projected against an injustice out in the world, and then the guilt is about an injustice in your inner world. Like, I'm angry at you because you've done something wrong. I'm guilty about me because I've done something wrong. And so it's like,
I don't quite see the anger piece in this case exactly that way. When you turn the anger in upon yourself, it's not so much a feeling of guilt that I did this wrong. It is more of a true sort of anger of, how could you have been? It's a reproachful anger. It's how could you have done that? And I imagine that's what Paul felt, was this insight into, look at what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was doing such good, and I've done such horrible, horrible things. I'm such a bad person.
Yeah. I'm
So,
literally just on that spot in the story in chapter 9, and I'm going to take some liberty with it, but I think it's justified in the sense that because ones tend to repress their anger, like all of our types, right? The root sin is such a great concept because it's beneath the surface. You wouldn't automatically be aware that was the thing, right? And so whatever your type is, when you learn your root sin, if you're not like a little bit surprised and then embarrassed, maybe you're a different type. Anyways, so ones, their defense mechanism is reaction control. So really like, we're just going to keep it cool because being angry is bad and we're supposed to be good. And so Paul, he does his reaction control by going in to get a letter from the high priest so he can be legit and go to the synagogues to round up and try to put more Christians in jail. And on his way, he's struck down by a light from the Lord. I wonder if that's just a biblical way of saying the pressure just breaks on him.
I can totally see that. He just basically has a nervous breakdown because he realizes how bad he is when his whole purpose has been trying to be good.
Yeah, like he was maybe seen through the cracks a little bit before, but he was able to keep up the whole thing. And then finally something just knocks him down. And then it says he's blind for 3 days and he won't eat or drink. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, that's being pretty hard on himself. And, he's just a mess.
But I can totally see that. That's kind of that, potentially kind of that one's tendency to take it all in. And basically, I could see that as a full-on depressive episode. Basically, just can't function. He can't get beyond what he has just discovered about himself.
Yeah.
And he can't get beyond how mad he is at himself for what he has discovered about himself.
Yeah, so it's like he can't see anymore. He doesn't want to eat, doesn't want to drink. He's just totally imploded, right?
Shut down.
Yeah. Do you know what happens next in the story? How it gets resolved for him?
I don't recall.
So God calls on this guy Ananias, and he's like, "I want you to go see Paul." And he's like, "Paul?" It's like,
right?
You gotta be kidding me.
So you're sending me to my death here, God, right?
Yeah. And he comes and he offers Paul grace and unconditional love that he doesn't deserve. And that's what I've read is the invitation that a one needs is just that you don't need to be perfect. Like, you don't need to be good. You don't need to take the whole thing on your shoulders. You are loved just as you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the offering of the fruit of the Spirit for one. And the fruit of the Spirit is that peace and that tranquility and that acceptance of you and of life, how God intended it.
Yeah. Do you love nature? Are you a nature lover?
I am.
Yeah, that's Richard Rohr does this whole thing. He's a one. And he's one of the if you don't know who he is, he's I think he's a Franciscan priest.
Okay.
Maybe Jesuit. Sorry, Richard. But he's got a great book on it and whatnot. He's a one, and he talks about how ones tend to love nature, and that another thing that's kind of therapeutic for a one that really helps them come into their true self is, nature is perfect, right? And the nature is growing, and the idea of growth, which kind of hits on the fruit of the Spirit, the patience. And hey, it doesn't all have to be perfect right now. Instead, it's a process, and it's good as it is. And something about being out in nature is good for the soul of the one. And I think everyone, by the way, but particularly.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think particularly ones watching the world slow down forces a one to experience patience, which does not come easily. At least I can speak for myself as a one. Patience does not come easily.
Yeah. Do you have to get everything done before you can relax?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I knew my wife Abby, who's a one, loved me when one time when we were dating, we ate dinner, we cooked dinner together, and then ate, and then sat on the couch together. And for like a cool half hour, she allowed the dishes to just be in the sink.
Yes. Yep. That is.
I was like, man,
absolute.
she's into me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things about one's kind of that drive to get things done and make things happen does create some disconnection for ones. So ones can sometimes seem like they're aloof because it's like, oh, well, why won't you just sit down and have a conversation with me? And you can't see inside the one's head where there's this list of 80,000 things that have to get done before I'm allowed to sit down and do that. So it can make it very hard to relate to a one because when I was dating my husband, Mike, I would often ask him, what are you thinking? And he'd be like, nothing in particular. I'm just enjoying the moment, which was just mind blowing to me.
You're like, this man's a liar.
How can you not be thinking about the next 12 things you have to get done?
Yeah. That's, I think it's so true. And you use the word, I need to get all these things done before I'm allowed.
Yes.
Right. Because there's an order here and there's a standard and there's good and bad. Right. Like, and for other personality types, like it just doesn't occur to them that they shouldn't be able to just take a siesta or what have you. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, and we connect with the 9s. We just talked about 9s last week, and apparently under stress, 3s become unhealthy 9s where we like avoid conflict, avoid stuff. But there's also this part of me that like, I want to wake up in the morning and drink coffee and sit around and read scripture and just kind of slow start. And my wife, who's the one, she's on a whole different wavelength in the morning typically, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's been really helpful to know that this is going on for her. Otherwise, we would just be thinking each other are crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting. One of the things I learned is that ones are usually very surprised to learn that they are a gut type and not a head type. Because a one will rationalize everything to, it's not about what I feel. It's not about gut. It's about what's logical, what's right, what's reasonable, what's acceptable. So a one will convince themselves that they're a head type when in fact they are a gut type.
And why is that important to know?
I think that's important to know because it provides a sense of ground. I mean, for me, it provided some grounding to understand that really all the passion and the drive that I feel doesn't stem from some overarching right. It's not something mental. It's not something up here that necessarily truth. It's something down here that is truth.
Does that then lend to the idea like if it was up here and it was kind of how you could convince yourself, then it's like, everybody should be able to see it because, exhibit A, B, C, D, whatever. But if it's down here in the gut, then it's more understandable why people don't get that this is the right way.
Very possible. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the one list that I was reading about of ones, people that would probably be ones, Dr. Spock was listed as probably a one.
Hmm.
The gut almost feels like weakness to a one. So it has to be logical. To say that you're a gut type feels like, oh, well, I'm weak and I can be persuaded anyway.
I read that most ones don't like that they're a one.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Well,
You seem okay with it.
I just was very not surprised by it because of other things about myself. And I think it depends on which ones you feel like you model yourself after. I mean, when I look at a list, it's like, hey, look, Mother Teresa's a one, Nelson Mandela's a one, Mahatma Gandhi's a one. How not be okay with this?
Yeah.
Then if you dig a little deeper and you get into some of the more unhealthiness of a one, Osama bin Laden is a one. Stalin is a one.
Yeah.
Hitler was probably a one.
Yeah.
One can get themselves so convicted and so convinced and so narrowly focused that, you can either use that to a very good reason or to something that winds up being very destructive. And I think back to your discussion with Paul, Paul was in a place where he was more in the destructive category. And I think the realization that that's where he was what was so paralyzing to him. And he had to be redirected to realize he could take that passion and that drive and move it in a positive direction.
Yeah. I'm thinking about how he wants to destroy the church. He's fueled by his anger to destroy the church because it's a threat to everything he thinks is right. And I somewhere came up with this like distinction about anger, that there's probably multiple categories we could come up with, but I have two: righteous anger and self-righteous anger. And self-righteous anger wants to destroy things, right? You're threatening the good, and so I'm going to destroy you. You think about some of the discourse around COVID and everything and how some people talk to each other, right? Where a righteous anger wants to restore, wants to bring back. And so even last week when I preached a little bit of Apostle Paul and James's story about nines. And there's a moment that's captured in Galatians where Peter comes and he begins to not eat with the Gentiles again. And Paul says, I oppose you to your face, like he's so extreme. But he is trying to restore Peter and goes back down to Jerusalem, building into the relationship still. It's like, I think that he's mostly, not completely, but turned the corner from destructive anger to productive anger.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, and that's like something we kind of touched on in the pre-interview, is just like the idea of anger as a motivator. And we're kind of coming back to it a little, but it's like we often think that anger must be a bad thing always.
Yeah, and it can be, I think ones are probably very driven. I kind of picture it as fire. And they have this internal fire, and that fire can be a driving force. It can provide the energy to drive them forward to what they think is a justice or a goal or perfection or that ideal. And that fire can also consume them. And so I think often anger is visualized as red and as fire. And I think it's a very appropriate metaphor.
Yeah. Is there a time that you can think of that your anger has served you well?
I guess when it's been a motivator for change. So just a small example, and this is something that most of the folks that know me from the church will understand, is I probably didn't identify it as anger at the time, but the toy drive that went so terribly wrong and seeing people being upset because they couldn't get toys for their kids when I knew that other people had walked away with bags of toys, drove me to want to change it to make it more just and more fair and more even.
Yes. Yeah, I can see that. Thank goodness for your anger on that one. It was needed. It's interesting because I'm not sure what I felt. I mean, for those that don't know the story, just real quick, we kind of put together a pseudo last minute toy drive and collected a bunch of toys through some friends, and we thought that we were going to have toys left over, and our Facebook posting went viral and 400 something people showed up, and it was mass chaos all around. And we have since done 2 toy drives, or 3 since then? 3. With Jen taking the lead, especially in the first year single-handedly, and then developing some other people, and now it's far more organized and people get the toys that they're. I can't. Pandemic brain, right? Like,
yeah.
We had the one. Yeah, I was gonna say we could slice this, but it's probably unnecessary. Yeah, I was trying to think. As a 3, right? My driving energy is not so much anger. Really, I haven't thought of it on this level. Like, shame is a issue that us feelings types deal with. Like, I'm not enough, but also my 3 wants to be successful, and so I'm able to look at that and go, "Whoa, 400 people! It was crazy. It was amazing," and probably not face the the brutal kind of reality. Although I was one of the people that told people who'd been waiting in line for an hour that we had nothing left. That was pretty rough. Yeah, thank God for your anger and getting that thing together. Yeah. I share with you, I felt what I thought was some good righteous anger when I first started at the church, and our sanctuary, particularly the stage, had a bunch of things on it that weren't cared for. And one day I came in to kind of pick up a few things and found myself cleaning the entire thing. And I had so much energy, and I realized that I was angry, but that it was okay because this was God's church, and not the building, but this awesome community of people we have, and we're needed. So it was just like clean like a madman. Yeah. What is there anything else that you've learned? Because it seems like you must have read a fair bit about ones.
I guess the only other thing is just how the ones relate, and how 1 can kind of either wing to being a 9 or wing to being a 2. So the ones have these ideals, and if a 1 that wings 9 is an idealist, they tend to maybe more dissociate from the world to kind of think about and process and evaluate and find the right solution. A 1 that wings 2 tends to be an advocate. They take their passion and they distribute it to other people, and they advocate for other people. And so it can, it can be an interesting dynamic how a 1 relates to other ones even. Because a 1 who thinks you should be in action probably does not think very favorably of a 1 who's willing to sit and pontificate. Jack Kerouac was listed as probably being a 1. Ideal and separating from the world and pontificating on it. Probably not be a very good fit with a Mahatma Gandhi, who also has this drive, but feels like it needs to be used very specifically to help others. So I thought that was kind of interesting that 1s can kind of be in conflict with themselves.
Yeah, because the 1 wing 2, which is what you say you are, is action oriented in that way. Like, let's get something done. Yeah.
Let's not sit here and talk about it. Let's do something about it.
Yeah. That's it's interesting, right? Like I promised Abby I wouldn't like spend the Enneagram1 type talking about what I've learned about her and reflected on our relationship. But like, right.
But you're going to anyway.
Yeah. I was just gonna say something about me. Like as a 3, we tend to be action oriented, especially if you're a 3 wing 2, but I'm a 3 wing 4. And the 4s, have a sense of beauty and uniqueness and creativity. And so I will spend hours, just kind of redoing my presentation for my upcoming sermon and everything. And Abby's like, why don't you just get it done? I'm like, I don't work that way. Yeah. Well, it has been fun to interview you. You obviously have thought a lot about it. I appreciate that. I'm not very surprised. And I think that you clearly, I've never experienced your holy anger. Well, I guess I have, because you did the.
You just didn't know it.
I wouldn't have labeled it as that, right? But it's a blessing. Isn't that interesting to think of in that way? And you've been a blessing in our community and to me personally. So.
Well, our community has been a blessing to me. So.
Yeah, great. I'm going to end the interview, and then you and I can just debrief for a moment afterwards.
Okay. Thanks.